Welcome into the 16 Sports Extra podcast. I'm Jackson Neal. That's Sabrina Hoover. Sabrina, coming at you, talking about some Notre Dame stuff today because there's a lot going on campus.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, starting with the Notre Dame women's basketball team, I feel like it's just, a broken record at this point when we talk about their success and all the achievement that they've had so far this season. I will say it's been very exciting just to see their progression throughout the season, coming off that, their last loss was last year, November, in the Cayman Islands Classic. That's kind of crazy to think about that being their last loss. But no, seeing their progression throughout the season, seeing all the 6 ranked wins that they've had in that time span, and you can see that one, that Texas game, that UConn game, Duke being this past week, that big 11th ranked Duke, facing them at home, just the way they played in that third quarter, going on that 17-1 run. That was just insane. So, I mean, I know you've seen a lot of their games as well, but just to see their just achievements so far that have really lit up this team. And as you can see, the crowd has been a big factor. And even Neil Ivey has talked about that as well in the press conference, that being a big thing as well.
Oh, yeah, of course. And this team, I mean, there's so many areas to go with for this team, right? I mean, when I think about this here, obviously we're seeing Hannah Hidalgo highlights right here. How about Olivia Miles as well? She's also been so incredible. That backcourt has just been so fun to watch. But you've just seen the progression. You've seen, I think the biggest thing I've seen from this team is Niele Ivey's moves in the offseason to build this roster and how she saw, okay, why did they lose last year? Last year they lost in the Sweet 16 to Oregon State. And the main reason they lost was not because they weren't talented enough. It's because they just didn't have enough players healthy. They just could not stay healthy towards the end of the season. They were playing like 6 players still in the ACC, get all the way to the Sweet 16, but there's only so far you can go. This year, Lai-Tu King, Liza Carlin, Kate Koval as a freshman. There's so much depth on this roster right now. Even someone like Emma Rich, she got injured this year. Usually losing someone like that good would really hurt a roster, but they have so many pieces on this team. They can stay number one even if they do lose a couple players just because they're that deep now.
And it's so funny you say that, because even when, let's just say, Olivia Miles has an off night, like, it doesn't even matter, because you're right, they have so much depth and they have so many playmakers that can have a humongous night off the bench, and you just don't know who's going to have that big night. Usually, yes, it's Olivia Miles, Sonia, and obviously Hannah Hidalgo, but there's other players that really make an impact on this team. And I think the best quote I heard from actually Duke's head coach Cara Lawson earlier this past week was that they felt like they were, the court's level, but they felt like they were playing upward the whole time while Notre Dame was playing downward. And I feel like a lot of opponents that face Notre Dame probably feels the exact same way.
Yeah, no, it definitely had the uphill battle against it. Like, literally physically felt that, because especially that 17-1 run, it was just so tough. Fun stat from that game: Notre Dame won by double digits. Their lowest scoring game of the season. They scored only 64 points and still won by double digits. It's incredible. But of course, the big story, honestly, even bigger than that on Monday for the team, was their first number 1 ranking since 2019. Earlier this week, we were able to talk with Niele Ivey and Cassandra Prosper just kind of about what it's like to be number 1 in the country. Let's take a listen.
I do feel like Monday was, that was the first time that we've ever experienced that, playing a game right after that. So now we have that under our belt, so we can just focus on getting better and taking care of our goals every night.
I mean, we are such a special team. I think we've experienced that throughout the whole year, and then being able to be recognized as that is amazing. And then just, keep learning more about each other and just seeking higher and higher. I think our potential is amazing, and we're finally scratching that potential right now.
Yeah, just so cool to hear them talk about that and just scratching the potential right now, because the crazy thing is they're number 1 right now, but there's still nights where it's like there's another gear to hit. Like against Duke, obviously that 17-1 run's great. The first half, though, was not perfect.
Right.
This team still has areas to grow, and they're still this good. Yeah,
no, and that's so scary to think about for other opponents, right? That Notre Dame just continues to find different areas to improve on. But for them being number 1, obviously, in the country, I think it says a lot about this team and what they've gone through, a lot of the ups and downs and the adversity. But Niele Ivey talked about that in the last press conference against Duke, being number 1. Like, when they announced it in the stadium, when they were getting ready for the Duke game, it was like, wow, like, this is like the first time that's like, man, like it really hit her. And then she was like, all right, game time. So it's like,
Exactly.
You gotta kind of switch gears. But like, I bet that was a big moment that she won't forget, really.
And then now going forward, this Notre Dame team, I mean, the crazy thing is, so right now they're sitting at 15-0 in the ACC.
Crazy.
After the win over Miami last night. We were taping this on Friday. So coming up this weekend, they're not ending this regular season easily. This Sunday at NC State. NC State is 13th in the country. They're coming off a Final Four run last year. Remember, NC State came into South Bend last season and beat Notre Dame. I mean, one of the worst performances that the Irish had last season, arguably the worst, was against NC State. This is a really tough team. Then, of course, there's also Louisville and Florida State next week. So as they try to become the first team ever to go 18-0 in the ACC, I mean, it's not going to be easy because there certainly is a tough stretch to the end.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so crazy, too, to know that their last loss was back in November, because it feels like they have gone through a lot of adversity and a lot of ups and downs. Because you're right, a lot of these games, they've, shown a lot of progression, but some of them, they have been off on some nights, but they continue to find a way to win. I think that's what good teams do, and that's what good coaching does. But you're right. I mean, this season, coming down to a stretch, the regular season, I mean, they only got 2 more at home. Like, that's crazy to kind of think about.
And also, I mean, the best example I could say to that point for you, they find a way to win. Last night, they beat Miami by 40 points. The leading scorer was Sonia Citron led the team in scoring last night. She's, people consider her maybe the 3rd best player on this team.
Right.
I saw a recent WNBA mock draft that had her at number 3 overall for the prospects this season.
That's crazy.
Olivia Miles being number 2, Maddie Westbeld being likely a high 2nd-round pick, Hidalgo being a number 1 overall pick whenever she comes out.
Yeah.
The amount of, and then with the other talent they have on this roster, there's a legitimate argument you could make that the Notre Dame women can field a starting 5 of all future WNBA players.
Insane.
That's like a level of talent that you don't see very often. And these are players like, we're not just saying pro players in terms of they'll just make the league. No, Olivia Miles will probably be the number 2 overall pick this year.
Yeah.
Sony's going to probably be right behind her at 3.
Yeah.
Maddie Westphal will probably be like at 12th. I could see Liza Carlin being a 3rd round pick or something. And then we see Hannah Hidalgo one day being a number 1 overall. It's the amount of talent on this team is just incredible.
And I think I love Sony too, because like for instance, like Hannah Hidalgo, she shows a lot of her, not aggression, but she's very aggressive, and very passionate about the game. And so is everyone on that team. But I love Sony the most because she'll make a humongous block and then she'll just stand there. She's like, yeah, I did that. Like,
she's so nonchalant about everything.
So nonchalant. But I think that's what makes this team so good, is because everyone is so different and they provide in different ways. But like Hannah Hidalgo brings that fire and that energy, especially when she was hurt on the bench. Like she was bringing that fire on the sideline. But then you have other players like Sony that kind of keeps to herself, but that she's such a contributor when it comes to big games like that.
Well, let's switch gears now and let's go to a team that is not playing as well. And there's only, I think, one way to intro this.
And believe it, because we're going to get this thing rolling. I don't care if you gave up on 16 News now, Mike. I apologize to you.
Micah Shrewsbury having some fun there. The Notre Dame men's basketball head coach. We all remember that outburst he had after Louisville on Sunday. Then he had that little apology after SMU on Wednesday. Had to throw that in there. I know we've been talking about that a lot. But it just kind of underscores the fact of right now, not been the greatest stretch for the Notre Dame men.
It's been a lot of frustration. I can only imagine what Micah, I know that's probably half of what his emotions were that night, especially going on, especially that loss against SMU just this past week. But you're right, just right there. It's not been a good season. It's honestly been the opposite of success, really. Marcus Burton, I think, when did he get hurt earlier on this season? Came back. This team still hasn't really shown a lot of progression. They haven't really shown a lot of fight when in certain games. It seems like they really put themselves in a hole early, not making their shots, and then defensively, coming up short. And it's kind of frustrating as a fan, and I can imagine as a fan to watch games like this and be like, when is it going to turn around?
Exactly, and I think a really good point right there is the lack of fight, and that's something that Micah talked about in his press conference on Wednesday night after that. Okay, it's going to be like 24-point loss, 25-point loss to SMU. They were down by 34 at one point in the second half. I was at the entire game. It was never close, not even for a minute. SMU came out, and they were miles ahead, and they just did not stop. It's that lack of fight, I think, that's the really concerning thing for the Notre Dame men, because in Micah's tenure, this is his 2nd season.
Right.
Last year, it did not did not start well. Everyone remembers that home loss to the Citadel by 20 points. Unacceptable. You can't ever have that. You can't be losing at home to the Citadel ever, much less by double digits. After that game, they completely turned it around.
Yep.
They still, weren't winning every game, of course, but there was a fight. There was a passion with the team, and it's really seemed like he kind of said, okay, if you don't wake up and play, you can lose to the Citadel, and it was a big learning moment. And then they ended the season, and there's a lot of momentum coming into this year with a great recruiting class, and then so far this season, there's been more moments like that, like losing to Elon at home, going out to the Players Era Festival, not really doing that great.
Yep.
And then, then they started to kind of turn it around with a couple, close losses to start conference play. Like, okay, you're taking North Carolina down to a point, things like that.
Yeah.
But the thing that was really tough and the thing that's really kind of changed the season was that road trip to Florida.
Yeah.
Losing to Miami, losing to Florida State. Keep in mind, Miami's head coach, Jim Larrañaga, is not there anymore. He, retired because the season was going so bad. And when Notre Dame was down there to play Florida State, Leonard Hamilton, Florida State's head coach, announced he was going to retire because he's getting sued by a couple of his former players for not fulfilling NIL contribution promises. So basically, those were 2 games against bad teams with really shaky head coaching situations that you should win, and they didn't.
And I think, onto that point, I think the moment where I thought, okay, this team might show a little bit more fight was in that double overtime win against Boston College earlier. When they got that double overtime win and, they came back, I was like, all right, I know, we're towards the end of the season, but to see something out of them, I was like, all right, they're on the road. They're at Boston College. They get this big win. I think Micah Shrewsbury, his press conference after, or he was in the locker room after, and he showed so much just joy. And he was like, we got better. You got better every single day. And this is what I want to this is what I want to see. So after that, and I saw, how well they played on the road, I was like, you know what? Even though it's the end of the season, they're really going to show something to these fans, especially that they can really get a win, and especially on the road. And then after that, it was like, all right, we're back to square one.
It really feels like that. It's just been a really, really tough stretch for them. I think one thing we do have to mention, and it has to be put out there, is Marcus Burton's latest performance. 2 points against SMU that matches his career low. The only other time he scored 2 points in a game was against Rutgers earlier this season. He played 3 minutes that night. That's the night he got injured. He scored 2 points against SMU. This past game on Wednesday, he played 20-plus minutes. Yeah. So it's been a thing where it's, I know he's one of the top scorers in the ACC, even one of the top scorers among the country. It's just this bad stretch has kind of hit everyone on the team, and I think that just really shows it. They have a couple games to kind of turn it around. Right. Maybe we'll be talking in a week and say, oh, wow, I can't believe Micah came back from that. But as of right now, that loss against SMU, that seems to be really bad. I think going into the next season, there still is that great recruiting class. So that's obviously what I think Notre Dame fans are now obviously not looking forward to.
Yeah, definitely. And especially, again, I know we're going to put a bow on this, but to see Micah Shrewsbury, whatever opinion you have on that press conference, I think it was good to see that, he's going to fight for the kids. He's going to fight for the players. Obviously, there's still a lot of frustration with that, but it is good to see from a head coach.
Yeah, I think it should be said from us here at 16 Sports. We do like Micah. I've always thought every interaction I've ever had with him has been very great. Good. He's always been super gracious. That whole slap in the mic thing, that he was just fired up. I think if he knew that wasn't the Notre Dame mic or something, I don't think he would have done that.
No.
He's not like that at all. He is one of the awesome. Nicest people, nicest coaches I've ever interacted with. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. But before we wrap things up, there's another number 1 team on campus at Notre Dame, men's lacrosse. Sabrina, I know you're not the biggest lacrosse fan ever, but you're getting into the sport now. What have you just kind of seen watching Notre Dame for the first time?
Well, I don't know. They put up a lot of points offensively. That's really what I've seen a lot of. I mean, what was the last score? 22-9. Mm-hmm. So that's what the biggest thing. And you're right. Not even being able to. I've never covered lacrosse back whenever I came from Texas, but being able to see this team, knowing. I mean, you were there for their national championship last year, back-to-back national championships. Obviously, the biggest thing was ooh, are they going to three-peat? But then obviously listening to head coach, he was like, that's not even on our mind right now. This is an entirely new team, which it is. It's a new roster. You know, Pat Kavanaugh gone. And so like now, is it Chris Kavanaugh?
Chris Kavanaugh, yeah, the brother,
Yep, his brother on there. So like the last of the Kavanaugh brothers, right?
Well, so I asked, I asked, I think it was Corey. I asked Kevin Corey. I was like, "There's no more, right?" He's like, "I don't think so, man." So I'm pretty sure This is Chris is gonna be the last Kavanaugh,
right.
but you never know. Once they start having kids, eventually Notre Dame's gonna win the 2055 national championship, led by. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that's like the biggest thing I've seen is like how well this group kind of plays together. And they just, you know, seen the success they've had in the past, but also knowing that they're not really focused on the past. They're like, okay, even though this is a new roster, this is a new team, we're still going to put up the same numbers and continue to just find success.
Exactly. And you mentioned, you know, and not to bring up the past too much, but we have to look at the past tomorrow with tomorrow's game. We're recording this on Friday. So Saturday's game against Georgetown. It's at Georgetown. I think Notre Dame lacrosse fans might remember last year's game against Georgetown. They hosted them. I was at that game. 11-10 loss in overtime. Wow. The only loss that Notre Dame had all season long. So obviously they want to kind of make this a get-right game against the Hoyas. That's always just such a great rivalry. I mean, in any sport, really, Notre Dame, Georgetown. You know, two universities that are kind of aligned. It's always a really cool one. But I think the thing I want to bring everyone's attention to is on March 1st. We're going to have a little bit more time. So it's a week from tomorrow to talk about this one. But they're going to be playing Maryland in Atlanta. I mean, if you're a lacrosse fan, Notre Dame has now, you know, they've always been a great program, but now at the recent national titles, they are obviously number one. Maryland is just one of the most iconic programs. To see that played in Atlanta, I think is going to be a really cool thing to grow the game for the sport, as well as also just Notre Dame and Maryland lacrosse. But I mean, everything you've said about this Notre Dame men's lacrosse team, it's so deep. Even though they lost so many players, there's still so much talent. Chris Kavanaugh, Jake Taylor on offense, Sean Light, a guy who was an All-American as a true freshman. Now he's back as a sophomore. I mean,
it's crazy.
How can you get better? Like, you were already first-team All-American as a true freshman. What are you supposed to do? But he's still so great. There's so much talent. We should also mention Jordan Faison. I think people might recognize that name.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, he's expected to kind of get ramping up and get back going out there on the field. Obviously, had a little bit of a long football season.
Yeah,
right, remember?
Just a smidge. But I think it's also cool because that was my first Notre Dame men's lacrosse game I went to, was this past one against Marquette. Well, it was standing room only. Like, it was crazy to see the amount of fans that come out to those games.
It's such a great thing. I think that, like, a lot of people who don't go to the lacrosse games might not realize it, but there is a really great fan base for this Irish team, which obviously they should have, back-to-back national champions. But if you ever go to one of these games, obviously you're going to see a ton of other fans there. But it's also fun to talk with some of the fans, and you'll hear people, oh, I'm coming from Milwaukee. I think last year I met, it was a travel team from the St. Louis area.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, it's like, because they're, you know, out in St. Louis, they don't really have a good lacrosse to go watch. It's like Notre Dame's the closest thing. Let's go up to South Bend for a weekend.
That's awesome.
So you see a lot of things like that. And there's a lot of kids, especially when it gets nice out and you're able to be outside for these games. A lot of kids playing on the sidelines. It's such a fun atmosphere. And I think this season, when you're looking at this schedule, I mean, first of all, the schedule is as tough as you can make it. Right. You know, I mentioned the Maryland game, Georgetown, Ohio State, Michigan, Duke, Syracuse, Virginia. Even the season closer, hosting Penn. I mean, if you're not familiar with lacrosse, Ivy League lacrosse is arguably the best conference in the sport. So it is a tough conference and non-conference schedule for the Irish this year. But they have the talent. They have enough talent back. They bring in enough people that I think Kevin Corrigan, man, you can't. It's like, there's a couple of coaches in sports, and Corrigan's kind of reached that point. It's kind of like Nick Saban in like 2015. Like you just don't bet against that.
Oh no! And then I love, like, I think it was the press conference you did, like the season preview of Kevin Corrigan. But he's just such a relaxed, like, just laid back guy. But he's also a winner, and you can tell that he knows what this program can achieve. He already has achieved the biggest goal you can get in this program, but he's hungry for more. And I think from a head coach standpoint, that's all that you want.
Exactly. It's been almost 30 years since the last three-peat in men's lacrosse. We're going to be following that as we throughout this season. We're wrapping up 16 Sports Extra podcast here. I want to give one other quick shout-out, too. We're talking about men's lacrosse. Got to talk about women's lacrosse as well. New poll got released either today or yesterday. Notre Dame women up to 11th in the country.
Awesome.
So I know we're always thinking about men's lacrosse here at Notre Dame, but if you can get out to a women's game, they're pretty good as well. So that's something kind of fun to monitor. But
Awesome.
We'll be coming back at you next week with more coverage, just come around the Michiana Notre Dame kind of area with sports coverage. But thanks for watching 16 Sports Extra, the podcast.